There's a distinct championship feeling here at Fir Park, said Jenny McNee in commentary as the match kicked off. Thousands of Rangers fans had squeezed in for the penultimate game of the season, perhaps more in hope than in expectation of a title party, something that required both a Rangers win and for Aberdeen to slip up at home to St Johnstone. The most likely scenario was 2 narrow wins, probably by the odd goal, which would still leave the challengers having to come to Ibrox on the final day of the season and win by 5. No, a Rangers win in Lanarkshire would be enough, as long as Aberdeen didn't go goal crazy at Pittodrie, for them to secure a third championship in a row for the first time since 1935. It was starting to feel like normal service, but there was nothing normal about the situation Rangers faced that day. This new era of regular success that we've been talking about had been engineered by Graham Souness and had been driven on by Terry Butcher, but by then, neither manager nor captain were employed at Ibrox. Even the new skipper, Richard Gough, was in hospital, listening on the radio as the Rangers squad became more threadbare the closer the finishing line approached. The pressure was becoming intolerable. But then, pressure was the theme of the whole season, as Souness's war footing with the governing bodies expanded to encompass the media, Perthshire tea ladies, the Rangers support, and 2 of their greatest heroes, serving only to create more strain for all concerned. The same abrasive personality that transformed the Scottish game had now created a monster from which Souness himself had to escape. His players, however, couldn't escape it, and the real story of 1991 was their ability to respond to this tension, both external and internal. It was a season where individual players showed the strength of character to emerge as new leaders or to simply survive, and where collectively, during some of its darkest hours, they responded with trophy-winning performances. As Ian Durrant later described them, those were the days that summed up the true Rangers. There was no day more so than the league season's denouement at Ibrox, which was a drama scripted by Rangers the week before. Walter Smith, in Ole's third game in charge, and beside his new assistant Archie Knox for the first time, were still encouraging their side to push forward for an equaliser at Fir Park that would only have likely changed very little unless he could follow up with a quick winner. With Aberdeen winning 2-1 late into the day, as things stood, a draw in the final day showdown would be enough. It was still enough when Motherwell sprung a counter and Dougie Arnott scored a brilliant goal to make it 2. It was then, with only 4 minutes remaining, that Rangers should have cut their losses and moved on, holding on to that slender goal difference advantage over Aberdeen. But still they charged, leaving wide open spaces aching to be exposed. Inevitably, that naivety was punished again when, with only 1 minute remaining, Arnott and Motherwell repeated the same trick. What could have been a league-winning day finished up feeling like a catastrophe. For 23 weeks, Rangers have been top of the table, and now, with only a week remaining, they were second. With 23 points from the last 24, and with 26 goals scored in those 12 games, Aberdeen were coming to Ibrox in red-hot form, with Rangers scrambling around to find even half-fit players. For that week in May, the whole era that is now synonymous with Rangers' dominance hung by a single thread. To start the journey of 4 weeks to that week in May, I'm joined by David Edgar. How are we?
I'm all right. Yeah, I mean, it's an epochal season, really, in terms of what it represented, the changes that took place, the personalities, the stories. There's so many things that come out of this season that I think we still use as comparisons, even now. I think there's so many things that came out of that season that changed Rangers and changed Scottish football, as pretty much everything Graham Souness was involved in, positive or negative, roundabout then, tended to do. And of course, the most thrilling of last days at Ibrox, certainly up until 2003. So it was a crazy season. We went up and down like a yo-yo in terms of our emotions. And my goodness, yeah, as a young kid, moving from being a little boy into being a teenager, this was the season where a couple of my honorary uncles decided that they would head elsewhere.
And joining us from sunny Spain, we are recording this a matter of days before Rangers' Europa League final, is Alan Bradley. How are you?
I'm good. I've just put the sombrero down just now, Martyn. You've got my undivided attention, but no, really good. As David said, I'm looking forward to this one. I took a few notes. It's the usual domestic against European, challenges we have. New players coming in, as David mentioned, other ones going out as well. Relationships between the manager, some of our key players, and within Scottish football. Just an absolute kind of fascinating season. And again, my goodness, the end. I'll never forget it, Martyn. Just such a wonderful end, but it's up and down all the way through the season till we get there.
Yeah, it is dramatic. It is pretty torturous. We'll start in Italy, where Rangers' seasons, I guess, have started for the last two. It provided regeneration in '88, David, these trips to Il Choco, of course, and maybe some space for integration and cultural adjustment in 1989. But this time, I guess it provided the portent of the tempest that you've talked about, what was coming in this season. Italy, of course, was the centre of the football world. It was the centre of the football world anyway. But I think for maybe the only time a World Cup was held at a time where its host nation was the epicentre of football. It might have lacked the sufficient degree of attacking football, but there was no shortage of drama. It was an incredible month to watch football, David. Drawing in a large casual audience with this the BBC's kind of operatic approach with Pavarotti and Puccini and all that, and I guess that would have a bigger impact on Rangers later on, which we will talk about. But let's look at how this affected the Rangers players involved. A lot of Rangers players involved at the World Cup. Let's look at Scotland, obviously, first. Scotland are in Genoa. McCoist and Johnston have scored 8 of the 12 Scotland goals in qualification. Okay, they are the absolute pinnacle of that team. 35 goals for Rangers in the season before. A lot of expectations that they would lead the charge against Minnows Costa Rica. Right up until the tournament kicked off, 8th of June on the Friday, Scotland were playing on the Monday, and Rox was starting to give hints to the press that Bayern Munich's Alan McInally, whom he believed Costa Rica feared, you mentioned this in the episode before, they regarded him as the Scottish Van Basten, would start the opening game. And he started leaking stories that Ali was maybe less than truthful about his fitness. He turned up with a hamstring problem, hadn't told anyone. He was also enthusiastic, huge desire to be involved, decided to keep it quiet, and they were going to assess McCoist's fitness over the weekend. McCoist, in his book in 1992, said that he was fully fit. Roxburgh actually started to tell him, started to get in his head that he started to look a bit jaded, Ali. You're not quite with it. Despite the Scotland defenders he was playing in training saying, he was on fire. And of course that famous story where McCoist genuinely thought he'd been picked when Roxburgh said Mo and Nally instead of Mo and Ali. But this was a very odd state of affairs on that Monday afternoon, David.
This is crazy management, no matter how you look at it. To make a decision is one thing, and he has the right to play Alan McInally. This is not some scrub, okay? I know that he's become a bit of a joke figure in his punditry career, but he was, he'd gone from Celtic to Aston Villa, done well enough to go to Bayern Munich. He was a good player, and he was playing at the top level of European competition. There was zero disgrace in saying, for this match, I want to pick Alan McInally. I would have disagreed with it. I would have disagreed with anything involving Ali McCoist because, we're about to talk about a disagreement I had with somebody that I liked far more than Andy Roxburgh, that Rangers fans in general had. It's just bizarre management because, firstly, to not tell him until he names the team in front of everybody is just crazy. How do you think that's gonna act? Because you may need him. Right, regardless if you don't want him for the Costa Rica game, you might need him. Turns out they did need to throw him on, and turns out, the plenty of changes had to be made throughout that campaign up front. So it's bizarre. Secondly, to then not have the courage to just say, I'm the manager for this game, I'm picking him, to then feel that rather than you need to go this, to use an old Scotch word, sleek it route of, well, actually, he's kind of injured, and then to bizarrely, as you say, try to get into the player's head to tell him you're actually off form. Someone might be able to explain and make a case to me about why that was good management. To me, it was cowardly management. It was he did want to drop the popular player, but he didn't want to take the criticism that would come his way. That is not strong management. If you look back 4 years before, Alex Ferguson drops Graham Souness for the Uruguay game, takes Graham Souness aside the day before, explains to Graham Souness why he's dropping him, and then tells the press this isn't why I'm playing him. Now, who are you going to respect more? You know, the guy that does that or the guy that's gone about it in this way? It's just utterly bizarre. Can you imagine a manager now saying to a striker, just because you're not playing him in one game, by the way, you're off it? I mean, I can't get my head around it. And, you know, I think we're very fortunate Ally McCoist's personality is such that he is somebody that, as we all know, looks for the positive. But more importantly, Ally McCoist is strong. It's an underrated quality in Ally McCoist. But we've got so many instances of it throughout his career. Ali GTF, for example, and you know, this and various other, you know, the Hateley thing we're about to talk about. We're very fortunate because I'll give you another comparative. Jim Leighton, that very summer. Yeah. Jim Leighton was dropped for the FA Cup final replay and never recovered. You know, he really lost. Remember, he ended up as being the reserve goalkeeper at Dundee. Yeah. And he had the late renaissance at Hibs and Aberdeen, but he lost years out of his career.
He would spill. He would spill the ball for the late Brazil goal that would knock Scotland out. So Roxburgh had gone for the more target man approach with McInally. I think that's fair, and Costa Rica looked very, very comfortable with that, if truth be told. He then moved.
Shockingly, eh?
Yeah, incredible. Just as if they were prepared for it. Then he moved for speed against Sweden, this middle game, huge game, which Scotland did win. But no McCoist again. It's both Robert Fleck and Gordon Durie in and around the area that Mo Johnson would occupy. So quite an attacking team, but again not one that involves McCoist. Again, the press seem to be aware of this. It's going to be either Fleck or Durie. McCoist not really getting quoted. He does start against Brazil, but it's a pretty drab performance, in all honesty. He explains that, Alan, by talking about these psychological blows that his manager had kind of given him early on, these demotions. But for someone that was in such good form, had been so crucial to Scotland's qualification. It was a really tough summer for Ali, but I think David's intimated as well, we were going to find out this season just how strong he was.
Yeah, the thing about Ali, David mentioned that people underestimate it. I mean, he was as hard as nails as well, you know, in terms of on the park. But mentally, he didn't just bounce back. He went, oh, you bloody think so? And every time, he didn't even just go back to that level. It was like, watch this. And it's as if he just used that to motivate him even further. Do you get what I mean? To just keep climbing and climbing. And I think we'll see that again as you go through the season. But no, I think the whole, even the Roxburgh thing as well, not even just how he handled it with McCoist, but that has an impact as well. And a lot of people will be close to McCoist too. And, you know, the way all this stuff was going on. So, in a way, he obviously just kind of shot us in the foot, I think, you know, in terms of that whole way he handled the thing. Yeah.
Also, he, just as an aside, he did exactly the same to Alan McInally for the second game. He didn't tell him he was dropping him either. I mean, it leads to the legendary
that was
story.
There's not an old school thing in this. I'm thinking Fabio Capello 2010, where he would name his team, and I don't mean name it to the media, I mean name his team an hour before kick-off, because that is how football used to work. There wasn't what you mentioned earlier there, David, about the Alex Ferguson dealing with Souness in advance, was maybe... It's incredible saying that this is ahead of its time, this kind of basic humanity, common sense kind of management, but it probably was in football, because that was the kind of tradition down in tablets of stone. You name the team to the boys an hour before.
Even so, I just think it's really poor management, because what do you think is liable to happen? It's okay saying we've always done it this way. Roxburgh very much set his stall out Martyn as somebody who didn't do it the way he did. He hadn't come through the traditional coaching background. And there's a great story I just want to tell, because the younger listeners won't have heard it. It was on one of Ali's videos, that he was actually rooming with Alan McInally. He said so, and after hearing the news, he's in his hotel room. And he said, and I'm sitting there, I've been on the phone to my dad in tears. He's not picked me. I can't believe it. He said, and I'm sitting there with the light on. It's late at night, and I'm pretending to do crossword puzzles. And Nally walks in. He says, and to be fair to him, he goes, he's obviously been thinking about how best to approach it. And he went, "Oh, you get that light turned off. Some of us have a game tomorrow." And of course, McCoy's being McCoy. He bursts out laughing. He says, "But every dog has his day." He said, "Next, the Sweden game, it's happened to him, and he's on the phone to his dad in tears. I can't believe he's dropped me. I can't believe this." He said, "So Ali says, I just walk into the room and throw him a crossword puzzle and goes, maybe you can give me a horn with this." And you know, it does. It says a lot about the way that both of them were able. But again, an interesting thing that we can talk about with Rangers. There's never any doubt about Johnston. Johnston is playing, and I think that you know, people knew the quality. Johnston was, I think, a wee bit ahead of his time, certainly for a
in Scotland,
in Scotland,
yeah. Absolutely.
See that run in the channels. See that run in the channels. See that being the first defender. I mean, now, we still rave about it now, where we see Mo Salah do it or whatnot. Johnston with prepared the tireless run and the dropping into midfield, the going through the middle or the going wide. He was. I'm honestly going to lay this down, and people, you can all laugh at me. I think Mo Johnston is at least 15 years ahead of his time here.
Yeah, I think when he went to Nantes, David, you saw it. I mean, he went up 2 or 3 different levels, in terms of that one. So, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think what gets me too with the whole school teacher type, I don't know, Andy Roxburgh, I mean, everyone knows leadership and how you should do things, and you're talking about kind of human beings, and you should be able to, even if it's a case of you're going to name the team, but if you would know in business, wouldn't you, if someone, you're going to have a wee word with them in the quiet, you've got to be respectful of them, and you've got to do that and say, listen, I'm doing this and this is why, and people will actually accept it. As David said, even if you don't agree with it, but you'll go, well, ultimately you're the person in charge, but at least you've done it. But it's just that whole way, it was mishandled. It's just, and the thing is, we had a really good chance as well. To be honest with you, we should have beaten Costa Rica.
You think?
No.
We should have beaten Costa Rica, yeah.
No, but if we'd have played, I think if we'd played the right team, we should have beaten them. We'd beat Sweden. When it got to the Brazil game, if you remember, I don't know at the end. I think we made them angry, didn't we? Did Johnson hit the bar or something, and they ran up and then later made an arse of the kind of goal. But no, I think if we'd done things properly, we could have got through to the next stages.
Everyone expected it.
Yeah.
That is my
look at
memory.
The players in that squad. There's good players, right? And yet Scotland should have beaten Costa Rica. I'm sorry, Martyn. You just look at the levels of the two teams. I know that we can be a wee bit arrogant in this country, misplacedly. Morocco '98 springs to mind, but they were full of guys playing at top leagues. Costa Rica were most certainly not.
Yeah, can I just be clear for the record? I agree. We should have beaten Costa Rica. I wasn't. I absolutely was not thinking that.
See if we beat Costa Rica, then lost to Sweden, lost to Brazil.
That's very Scott. Yeah, no, but remember, by the way, this is a 2014 World Cup. You don't have to be in the top 2. There will be 4-6 groups with best third place. In fact, even the Brazil game actually didn't officially knock us out. We needed Uruguay, I think, to draw with South Korea, and we would have been the best third place team, but they got a 91st minute winner.
Of course,
something like that. Very, very Scotland. But no, when that draw was made in the December of '89, finally we're going through.
Yeah.
We've never qualified before. First time, we will beat Costa Rica, and then it's basically this kind of European playoff against Sweden, and that's
Martyn. Yeah, you know the helicopter Sunday Edinburgh one where Ian Murray, they're passing it about. We're not going; they're keeping it. The Scotland Brazil one, from recollection, had that feel. We didn't really want to. We never really pushed too much. Brazil didn't push too much either. There was this good relationship between Scotland and Brazil. And as I say, I'm sure it was right up towards the end until I think we hit the bar or whatever, and they went. And I think we were about 6 minutes to go or something. They went up the park and actually scored the goal. So there would have been, but no, definitely we should have done something in Costa Rica. I don't know how further we would have got, but certainly qualifying to the next stages.
Yeah, no, they should have done. For the rest of the Rangers players involved, probably not that much more enjoyable, certainly in the Scotland camp, than the McCoys. No. Johnson played I think every game. Scored the effective winner, the 2-1 win over Sweden, put Scotland 2-0 up from the penalty spot. Stuart McCall scored the first, who would obviously have this parry soon enough. But he didn't hit the bar, Alan. Taffarel made a save from Johnson from very close range. He should have scored. He really should have scored.
And this is what happened to Murdo MacLeod.
Well, yes.
People who heard him on the radio afterwards. Yeah, people who maybe heard him on the radio afterwards. Yeah, this is why.
Yeah. So Johnson... frustrating, because he probably should have scored the goal that put Scotland through. Richard Gough, last 45 minutes, has that foot injury that we talked about in the last season shows, reappeared, possibly again wasn't fully documented or fully admitted to when he joined up, but he lasted the first half against Costa Rica, and that was him. Scotland had 3 Rangers players in their squad. England had more. They had 4. Chris Woods didn't see a minute. Arguably, possibly should have seen more than 0 minutes. An ageing Peter Shilton was starting to get found out a little bit. Gary Stevens was dropped after the first game. England famously going from 4-4-2 to that 3 at the back. Bobby Robson felt that Paul Parker was a better wing back than Gary Stevens. Trevor Stephen,
quick.
He was very quick. He was. Trevor Stephen played the final 2 games. Terry Butcher saying his farewell to international football. He played 5 of England's 7 games. Missed 1 for experimentation and 1 through injury. But by his own admission, it was a struggle. He said he needed a small knee operation immediately after the tournament, and said, look, at that top level, he said he was hanging on in Italy. It would be a future Rangers star, who was, of course, England's man most associated with that tournament, of course, Paul Gascoigne. Butcher's injury we will come back to in another episode probably, but again, the signs were there. England's tournament was of relevance, more on the part than off it. I think England won the Fair Play Award. Robson's humanity, Gascoigne's tear, all of that meant that UEFA decided finally to end the ban on English clubs, and that would start immediately for the 1991 season. Manchester United and Aston Villa would compete in the Cup Winners' Cup and UEFA Cup respectively, but Liverpool, who were champions, were going to sit out another year. And Celtic were supposed to play in Europe, but then had to put their passports back because they were the team that had to kind of make way in that UEFA Cup. But David, this carrot that we have been able to dangle for 4 or 5 years now is over. That is now at an end, and the days of Rangers being the biggest club in Britain are also coming to an end.
Yeah, they are. I think we've got a couple of, I think we've got a couple of decent years ahead of us, and of course, even as late as '94, Duncan Ferguson will set the British transfer record. But shall we say, the wheels were in motion about it, and again, it was always going to be very difficult for a country of 4 or 5 million at that time, and a country of, I think, around 60 million at that time. They are going to, if they get their act together, because English football had been dreadfully run. Scottish football not much better, but English football was appallingly run by people who didn't like football fans. And I think once they got their arse in gear, plus, as you mentioned, 3 foreigner rule is going to limit us because the talent pool coming out of Scotland. I had a very interesting thing many years ago from a youth coach at Ibrox when I asked them about why Scotland, look at the 86 and 90 squads, they are packed with talent, right? I mean, they are, and there were loads of players at home that could have gone in. And then you look at the mid-90s, and I think, as I like to call them, the Scott Booth era, when guys like that are getting into Scotland squad, Scott Gemmell, etc. And he actually said it was the teacher's strike. He said we lost 3 years of kids playing football because all extracurricular activities were stopped. He said, so we have this huge gap, and it's taken us really to the last, maybe 10 years, because we just kept doing the things we'd done before that, which were by then outmoded and outdated. And look, it might be nonsense. I just thought it was an interesting it was an interesting thing to say. But yeah, you were right, Martin. The tectonic plates were shifting. 1990 acts, I think, is a nice point if you want to say when football changed, because the World Cup changes opinions on football. You mentioned there that people watched it, and rather than this sort of violent, people with no teeth running on the pitch, battering each other, thing that we had witnessed up to that point, there was this amazing culture. Then there would be the influx of foreign players into the UK. Then there would be obviously the Premier League. And that's because people looked at Italy in 1990 and went, oh, hang on, we can make a lot of money in this. Hang on, we can attract families to this. And it doesn't have to be this continual, the
hooligans, 1970s.
And I think it's a catalyst. It's not a turning point. That's not the right term. It's a catalyst, because it made... Now, there's good and bad. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who hate aspects of modern football. As we record, we've just seen Yanis Hadji put a TikTok video up called The Comeback. He's been out for 3 months. So football has changed in that way. But I always, when people go back and say, oh, I miss the old days, I miss certain parts of the old days. Don't get me wrong, because I grew up in it, right? And there was great things then. But I don't miss going to Hampden and having somebody pee down the back of my leg, for example. There have been great advances as well in that point. But what it did mean was that Rangers, who had been a dynamic, forward-thinking, go-ahead side, we're going to find that the glass
we were
ceiling...
going to get caught up.
The glass ceiling was lowering, and unfortunately, countries to the left of us, countries to the right of us, theirs was a lot higher.
I mean, David, I think you're absolutely right. I would say the formality of that process is 1992. That's when clearly football changed. Premier League, Champions League, law changes, television money starts to come in. 3
points, pass back, things like that, all the different,
but your catalyst is the word, and it is Italian 90. And it's, I don't know if I talked about this in the last show, forgive me, it's been a difficult week for concentration. But the coverage of Italian 90 changes everything. You have, and the BBC got this right for the 90s with Puccini and then Bernstein and Fuari or whatever. They knew they can amplify the drama, not obliterate it, not overdo it, just get it right. Now, that did tip over in the 21st century, where Sky could sell Bolton v West Ham as the coming of the apocalypse. But at that time in the 90s, it was just the right thing. The drama on your screen is better than anything that can be written. And they just got the pitch of that perfectly, which meant that more and more families, and David, you mentioned that word, I think it's absolutely right, but the middle classes buy into football in a way that probably hadn't been done before. And the lesson was finally learned by football execs in England and TV execs, which would bring about the Premier League, that the answer to their problems had been staring them in the face from the corner of their living rooms throughout the 70s and 80s. You make something attractive that people can see, they want to be a part of it, they want to buy into it, they want to pay to watch it. And of course, this is what will blow Rangers and Scottish football out the water. There's another part in that football coverage, in a way, in one stroke, it would dumb down eventually, because it just the drama thing would become too much. But it also starts a process of the opposite, and treating football fans with a wee bit more respect, that they can cope with detail. Yes, the BBC did and ITV did their own thing, but the main feed came from Italy. It came from Rai. And so the graphics that you saw on the screen were that came from the Italian broadcaster. And there was stats involved. And there was information that you probably wouldn't get a lot of at home. And team lineups became different. Every Scottish game that was covered up and including the 1990 Scottish Cup final, for example, would give the team lineups either horizontally or vertically. The first weekend of the 1990-91 season, when Rangers played Dunfermline, the BBC highlights had that as a tactical shape.
Formation.
Yeah. And it's an immediate change of, right, maybe that there can be a bit more detail. And as the 90s grow on, you're going to get a lot more of that. Andy Gray will pioneer that. We talked about that in the last show. And also do not underestimate, for the generation that came into the noughties and changed tactical writing kind of beyond understanding. Don't underestimate the impact of things like Championship Manager on that generation.
No.
This
how many
link,
players do we... Yeah, how many players did we all go about saying, "Oh, he's a great player," that we'd never seen?
You're linking
Teddy
football
Lucic.
you're linking football with numbers, and a lot of them. You're talking about different things. You're talking about styles and cultures, and you're talking about players. Your knowledge of players increases, and it's not just the Premier League that comes to us in '92. Italian football will come to us if you've got Sky in 1990, and eventually in the mainstream into the terrestrial audiences in 1992 and Channel 4. And all of a sudden, Scottish football until then probably had been protected. We discussed this a wee bit last week in terms of television, which meant by design actually that it was special, because you couldn't really see, certainly not live football, that AC Milan team. Well, you saw the highlights of their European wins on Sports Night. It was snippets. In terms of live football, when you got it, it was Scottish, not even English, with the odd exception. So everything was protected, which meant that we felt that our football was the kind of centre of the world. All of a sudden, in that summer, that protection's gone. And you realise there's a huge world out there. And we will demand, my generation will definitely demand, that Rangers are a part of that, and will complain bitterly that we are absolutely hopeless when it comes to European football that matters, because it matters to other people outside these parish walls. Anyway, back to the here and now. The same day that Scotland defeated Sweden, Graham Souness finally got the man he'd been looking for pretty much since he came to the club, Mark Hateley. He had a horrendous 18-month spell with injury, an ankle injury with Monaco. Decided he wanted to get back to British football. He wanted to get back to crowds. Was a huge driver in Hateley's move.
Lovely place, nobody turns up.
Exactly. He felt the need. He wanted to respond to all that. And here's an example of the Souness, McCoy's calls it nastiness. Souness bumped into a mutual friend of McCoy's, who was saying, Ali's very downbeat about missing out these games, and Souness said he'll be even more disappointed when he finds out who I've just signed.
Jeez,
So that edge.
Ali again writes about that in his book,
he
because he said he knew it would get back to me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was deliberate. Yeah, Souness absolutely knew. But here's again a portent of things to come. World Cup ends. Rangers, again, back in Italy, back in Il Ciocco for the training camp. Their first night off turns violent. Mo Johnson's not happy that Souness has brought Hateley in to kind of threaten this partnership, a successful partnership. Johnson throws drinks about. Hateley, let's just say, shows some physical restraint. And Johnson, it's McCoy writes in his book that the reason that Johnson's face was all cut up was because he attempted to jump in Scott Nisbet's bed during the night, only to find that the mattress had been removed. So he just face down and reported to Sport and Springs. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. But either way, this didn't look good for Rangers, and it looked like Johnson was going. Because a huge fight in the training camp, constant speculation. However, he returned. He apologised to Souness, made his peace, and he was one of the Rangers players chosen to model the new admirable kit, David. Again, all the things about Johnson, he's not an idiot. He knew politically where he still had some power, where he had to maybe make some concessions, and then, as we will discuss in the next season shows, when his time was up and he wouldn't hang around the way that McCoy would. We small chat on. I know we have a show on strips and all that, but you are a strip man, David. This kind of wood panelling thing, the horrendous shell suit. Where do you stand on this particular effort?
Well, it's controversial, this particular strip, and I can hear certain friends of mine who just despise everything to do with Admiral. Admiral was a venerable old British sports make that Rangers actually bought Rangers bought so that they would get 100% of the profits on the kits. And for those of you who, whenever a Rangers new kit manufacturer comes out and you hear people say, oh, that's terrible, and people who get strangely upset by the make of sportswear, he says that if Rangers ever get a Joma kit, then I'm going to go and start, I think, supporting Pollock. But all joking aside, the strip it's an odd one. I have a fondness for it because of my age. The material is odd. It's quite crinkly. The shell suit, I have to say, Martyn, when I was 13, I thought was the coolest thing I had ever seen in my life. Right? I thought it was. Now, this is the height of shell suit mania, and I thought, and every club had a shell suit, by the way, folks. Tracksuits were seen as very old hat, and the issue with it is, as dynamite as it looks, it wasn't for wearing for two reasons. Firstly, it was flammable. And given this was an age where practically every adult smoked, and they certainly could smoke inside, that could be a bit of an issue. It was incredibly flammable, as all shell suits tended to be. The other problem with it was that it was blue, white, and red in big segments.
Purple. And
when you washed it, the white bit turned purple, as science dictates when white mixes with red and blue. I have one up the stairs, which, as you know, I collect, and it is one of the very rare ones that A, didn't go on fire, and B, clearly wasn't worn or washed much. It's still white, absolutely. But there was some decent Admiral range. I've got some stuff that I love. Like, there's Admiral training range was pretty smart. I think we all remember Souness in the blue rugby shirt with the big white collar. It was pretty smart. But it was just sheer profit. And there is an argument that if you shift a lot of kits, which clubs like Rangers and, to be fair, Celtic do, but you won't get one of those deals that a Liverpool or a Manchester United will get from a major sportswear. You kind of are better if you can somehow control the production. And interestingly, Wolves have done this season, even though they have Castore. Castore only make the first team kits. Wolves outsource it and keep. The problem with it is the reason that clubs like Rangers and Celtic and other clubs who sell a lot of strips around the world but aren't in line for these huge deals, the reason they don't do it is the hassle, because then obviously you have to manage the manufacturing, you have to manage the supply chain, you have to do all of that, the accounting, all of that. It is a lot easier for company A to come and say, we'll give you an itemized, and you'll get your chunk of it and you'll get it all in one go. It's a lot easier. So I do understand that. But see, whenever Rangers have had this, they've had it twice where they've had in-house control of it. Once was Admiral, once was the Diodora era. Diodora never made our strips. They just paid to actually have their names put on them. Now, those strips were frigging horrid, right? Awful football kits. But Rangers made shed loads of money doing it. So it's something that I think all clubs really, unless you're Manchester United, Liverpool, and you've been given £90 million deals, I think all clubs should really look into, because it's so easy in the modern era to get in contact with. We get our shirts produced, easily enough. It's quite a straightforward thing. It just requires a wee bit of forward investment, but afterwards it'll pay off quite quickly. So I love the away strip though. See the white one with the red and the blue on the shoulders.
The West Germany inspiration. Yeah. Just before we go into
controversial,
almost terrible. Just before we get into some actual football chat, I'll stay with you, Davey. Just a quick other sartorial comment. Souness has returned with designer stubble, small beard. What are we making of that? A Rangers manager.
Hated it. I wrote about this in my book, and as I said at the time, I grew up in a half Northern Irish family, right? Every adult male had a moustache, right? And I grew up in Ayrshire in the 80s. Every adult male had a moustache. So moustaches to me were solid and trustworthy. Beards, suspicious, right? And I maintain this. If you're growing a beard, you've got something to hide. Beards are for Brian Blessed or people with something to hide. So unless you are Brian Blessed or you have something to hide, don't grow a beard.
I've got nothing to hide. I mean, I have a beard. I have nothing to hide. I just have nothing on top, and it's actually good to have.
Are you Brian Blessed?
I'm sadly not Brian Blessed, no. But, it seems to work, David. People like it.
It does. Look, and again, my views have softened since I lost my hair as well.
Right. As soon as Alan has created some more issues for himself, he has gone back to his target man thing, despite Europe kind of moving away from that model. He now has 3 very good strikers to fit into 2. Yeah. The other signing, but it won't come until October, is Oleg Kuznetsov of Dynamo Kiev, because the Soviet season doesn't finish until then. Souness has made it very clear he's going to play in a back 3, because that was de rigueur at the World Cup, and to do it properly you need the right players, he said. When Oleg Kuznetsov arrives, I believe we will have them. Now, Butcher and Goff are an established 2. Butcher had played in the 3 during the World Cup with England, but he's mixing things around here a wee bit, Alan. Can you remember what you thought about both signings first, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, the Mark Hateley one, I kind of knew of him. I've got relatives in Portsmouth. He was down at Pompey, and he'd done well in particular in one season. Then he obviously went to AC Milan, and then it became Attila the Hun, I think was his nickname, and I mind seeing him scoring some goals over there. So I knew of him. England as well. Obviously international caps, AC Milan, fine, and obviously the injury, so I knew about. I remember we played Man United, I think, maybe in a pre-season, around about that time when we got him, and I might have having a real argument with a guy behind me in the Copland who was just going on about how shite Hateley was and why did we get him. Now, the guy clearly was after 18 months out, and I think my response as usual, Martyn, was, listen, I think he's got he's got dozens of English caps. He's played, I think he scored against Brazil, didn't he? And John Barnes won too. Look who he's played with Milan and so on. And obviously, as time went on, clearly turned into that kind of wonderful player. But I was pleased with him. But I was a bit, that whole Mo Johnson, Ali McCoy's, I love that partnership. And as you say, it was a bit of a, as soon as when you first came in, you made a lot of changes. Things were going well. Then we were looking a wee bit more there's a bit of stability. Now you've suddenly come in, and Big Kuznetsov as well, who obviously was wonderful, saw him playing against us. I think in the friendly, did they not?
Yeah, Rangers, part of the agreement was a friendly at Ibrox, and my dad, I went to that. And Dynamo Kiev mid-season for them, right? We are still getting to grips with it. They looked incredible, and so does Kuznetsov. And
they strolled it, and he in particular looked good. Yeah. Now I've got loads going on here, so bear with me. The other one I've got is Terry Butcher. To me, probably like Andy McGowan. At that first season he came, to me was like the greatest Rangers centre half I had seen. So a real fondness for him. But what happened was, obviously, he was really struggling. And the other bubble I've got in my head is this World Cup. It's always terrible, I find, in a season after there's been a World Cup, because people haven't got the time off and so on, and they end up going, and all of those things came in. The Peter Huster one I thought was great because Mark Walters had been doing really well, but we did need cover. We needed to switch things and so on. So, but overall positive. The only other one that's kind of coming along is Terry Hurlock. That I couldn't quite. I know Derek Ferguson goes out for $750 and it's money we can't refuse. But that was a kind of strange one too. And again, Martyn, still in my head at that point in time, I'm like, what are we doing? Are we just going to focus in Scotland? Are we going to try? And it just seemed, it was a bit like that kind of strategic wilderness. The marketing, we're not quite here, we're not there, we're kind of stuck in the middle. Do you know?
Davey, I'll come to you in a moment about Hurlock and Hustra and some of the other targets that we looked at. But, and you and I have spoken about Hateley before, and we will again. Spoiler alert, listeners, he's quite a prominent figure through the show. Davey, your thoughts on Kuznetsov, who, I mean, let's be honest, that is, I'm trying to think of a bigger signing since Butcher, to be honest, if we're looking at this period of time in terms of reputation, in terms of international class. But, as I said before, to accommodate him, we're upsetting a kind of continuity there, Davey.
Yeah, and I think there was this assumption that it was just as easy as go and play in a 3. And you have to understand that this was completely and utterly alien to these guys who had grown up and played their whole careers. I mean, 4 at the back was just, 4-4-2 was basically a shibboleth, but 4 at the back was what you did. And I think that there was a sense of, well, what was wrong with the defence in the first place? Because
best defensive record in the history of the Premier League the season before.
There you go. We had been quite tight. It didn't seem to be the defence that was the problem. And again, I wonder if it was part of the limited thinking back then that we saw areas of the pitch in silos. I don't think we saw them as joined up. And we now know we live in an era where the goalkeeper is involved, as part of your attacking tactics. But back then, it was simple. Defenders defended, midfield linked defence and up front tried to score you goals. And that was pretty much what football was. It was nice and simple, but Souness wanted to, it was very influenced by that World Cup, which, I mean, you mentioned earlier, that World Cup was like we'd been watching black and white and suddenly here was Technicolor. And I think I could see why. Also, Kuznetsov was such a striking player in those sides. You noticed him, the big tall guy with the blonde curly hair and his amazing passing ability. I think if you're Butcher, you can say, well, I can knock a ball, I can knock a 60-yard onto somebody's foot, which you could. Yeah. And I just think that there was, these are huge characters, Butcher and Goff, huge. And I think saying we're going to change to accommodate someone and he's a defender, I could see both of them bristling slightly at that. And both of them had healthy egos. And I say healthy because you need it, to achieve, to be at the top level. And I could see both of them being kind of quite miffed by it. And yeah, I mean, it was going to be a little bit of a culture shock.
David, sorry, just to come in, the scenario planning thing, I'm going to do this and the impact of it will be X, Y, and Z, and going through, it's as if, like with Souness, he's like, I'm going to bring in Kuznetsov, right, hold on, what about Butcher and Goff? I'll do. What about the Hateley one as well? But you've got Wee Johnson, you've got McCoy, and the two of them are playing well and they're doing, I don't know, there just seemed to be quite a lot of that going on. And the impact of it was, obviously, the McCoy, you saw it with Johnson as well. To start off with, that obviously caused a lot of problems there. You see the same, obviously, at the back. I don't know. It's just, you just wonder what was going through Graham Souness's mind at the time, whether this was just one last, right, I want to do one last kind of chance here. I know we've been struggling in the two fronts, but it just seemed to cause a bit of, I don't know, kind of disharmony, didn't it, early on? Yeah.
I think you get, as human beings, we all get an idea in our head that becomes difficult to shift on occasion, whether it's buying something, whether it's a view on something. He wanted Mark Hateley, end of story. Mark Hateley could have been hurpling about on one leg if he was available to come to Rangers. Graham's
going to get him,
sign him, and it turned out to be a wonderful decision because he was a top ranked player. There was an element when we were bringing in Mark Hateley of, because again, this is going to sound so peculiar in the, to people who grew up in the ages of squads and horses for courses. If you had two strikers, you basically had Gary McSwegan behind them in case one of them wasn't fit. That was sort of,
that's right. Yeah.
That's kind of what we thought it was, right? You wouldn't have 3 first choice strikers for 2 positions. That just seemed alien and silly. And again, Martyn, you'll remember, I know you're a student of this period, when Benitez and Mourinho came in at Chelsea and they started rotating. The amount of complaints from old, people who'd played in the 80s saying, the players don't like this, they won't like being red, and now it's...
But their theory was, of course, that there's no such thing as a backup. You have a lean squad of 22 players, 23 players, whatever, and that's it. Anybody can play. It's not a case of, oh God, we're going to have to play him this week. So it isn't your reserves. But you're absolutely right, that's anathema to a Rangers supporter at this time, because you have a partnership at either end of the ground that has been reliable, it's popular, successful. And you're right about Hateley, Davey, he wanted him, he was coming in, but that's a departure from the type of football he played the season before. I can see the Kuznetsov angle, because as great a player and as totemic a player as Terry Butcher was, he wasn't as good as Ole Kuznetsov. Richard Goff is nowhere near the football that Ole Kuznetsov was. He would grow into the greatest leader I think the Rangers have ever had on the park, maybe till now perhaps. But
after John Gregg, absolutely.
Aye. But
Goff's 9 in a row went the right way.
Yeah, exactly. But Kuznetsov
yeah.
was super class, and we were struggling. Okay, we were struggling in Europe because we just didn't have players good enough on the ball. We had been defeated. Bayern Munich maybe slightly different. They're just very good. But the other exits were self-inflicted to a certain degree. What I want to ask about, Alan's triggered it already. Peter Hoostra makes sense. Absolute sense, because you can't be too reliant on Mark Walters. Bringing in Brian Reid from Martyn as defensive cover makes sense. Getting Derek Ferguson, he'd spent most of the last season on loan at Dundee. You get 750 grand from Hearts.
Unbelievable.
Yep, see you after. Soonest doesn't like him. He's not. The other signing. Now, Jan Molby is Rangers' midfield target for the season. Jan Molby wants to come to Rangers. Liverpool exercise a clause in his contract that they can have another year option. It's up to them, and they take it. He wanted Jim Bett, and that fell through from Aberdeen. He wanted John Collins, but that would be a Celtic deal that he couldn't hijack. Collins would go to Parkhead that summer. All three are ball players. It goes back to the discussion we had about the departure of Wilkins. Terry Hurlock turns up as our midfield signing that summer, and Souness would be at great lengths to say, listen, he's a far better player than people think. But I think when you come with the reputation he has as some kind of manic bone crusher, the fact that he can play a 5-yard pass is a minor miracle in and of itself. Terry Hurlock was, by the way, a better player than maybe his reputation, but he wasn't Jan Molby, Davey.
No, Jan Molby would have been just fantastic, because he was exactly that type of player that you needed. He could hold a ball, and he'd grown up in that Liverpool, and before that Ajax, that system of a lot of passing. You know, it was famous. It was always the remark thing about those Liverpool teams. They passed, they outpassed you, and he could have done that. In the hurly-burly of Scottish football, it would have been interesting, but I think he had so much class. And he played in England in the 80s, you know, which wasn't exactly...
He could handle himself.
I think he would have been absolutely brilliant. Collins, it was a good player. I always thought Collins was a good player. He would have been all right. Jim Bett was a guy I just could never warm to. He played for Rangers before really my time, so I just had no identification with him as a Ranger. But he was a very, very good footballer, and he would have
played well against us, Davey. He'd play well against us for Aberdeen constantly.
He played well against most teams for Aberdeen.
He was a good player with us. He just didn't have enough decent players around him. But I mean, obviously I've seen him, but Jim Bett was a good player.
And he would have been good. Collins, I think, would have been good, although I think a little young at that point to be a playmaker. Yeah, he played in the left a lot at Hibs at that stage, and he didn't have the. Well, he was a great player, but he didn't have the kind of figure he became so inordinately proud of after his spell in Monaco. But Molby would have been Jan Molby would have been the perfect player for what Souness wanted to do. It then is odd that he then goes and brings in someone who was a tackler. You know, that was what. Now, Hurlock was a better footballer, and we would see this. And it's kind of hard not to damn him here with faint praise. Oh, he was better. But it's not Terry Hurlock's fault. If you try, you know, he can't do what Jan Molby can do. Equally, Jan Molby couldn't do what Terry Hurlock can do. And I think Terry Hurlock has a right to think, well, if you're signing me, it's because of the skills that I have exhibited thus far in my career. So this is a conscious decision from Souness. Against that, it might have been, I'm not going to lash out the money right now. I'll pay, 350 grand for Terry Hurlock. I know I can trust him in the domestic game, and I'll still keep, because, you know, it's not like now there wasn't a window. I'll still keep my eyes peeled and see if I can pick somebody up for a fee. So there could have been an element of that, but it does, you know, it's very difficult to say. the three signings that will be the spine of your team in this 3-5-2 don't match up. On the one hand, you've got Kuznetsov, and on the other hand, you've got these two guys who, one is a target man, one is a Rottweiler. Again, it's this tension between, I know what I want us to do, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
Unfortunately, with Derek Ferguson, if Derek Ferguson had have been professional and had applied it, Derek Ferguson had the qualities. He could. He was like a young Souness. He could pick a pass. He could control midfield, and he had to dig as well. But it was his off the field stuff, and that was a real shame because
he blew it at Hearts, and he blew it at Hearts, and he blew it at Sunderland because he didn't have the brain to be a footballer, unfortunately.
No. But again, as we will see next week, there is an answer in the middle of the field of a ball-playing Class A playmaker who's called Trevor Stephen, who wanted to play there, but as soon as only when needed would he do that. Rangers started the season home to Dunfermline, 3-1 win. Hateley and Johnson on the score sheet, very comfortable, 4-4-2. Three other games, we'll look at two mainly just now. Away to Hearts, Rangers play 3-4-3. So he goes for the trident. McCoy's maybe a wee bit deeper line. McCoy used to play midfield, of course, early mid-80s for Rangers. And this back three, because Kuznetsov's not there yet, but Rangers are playing a back three. You got Richard Gough, a right-sided defender, playing at the left side of a back three, and Gary Stevens, a right back, playing at the right side of a back three, someone he's never played before, effectively using Trevor Stephen as a kind of wing back. Again, Trevor Stephen not blessed with a huge engine and bags of pace, Hoostrow on the other side. But Rangers are brilliant. 1-3-1 at Hearts at Tynecastle. Some excellent football. Genuinely good stuff. McCoy gets a couple of goals, Hoostrow gets another. The interpassing, the interchanging is great. And then Celtic come to Ibrox. Again, the similar kind of formation. And this is what happened.
Well judged by the referee, David Syme. Here's John Collins. Glancing header! Derek White for Celtic! 8 minutes into the second half, and Celtic, who've been under the cosh for so much of the game, go ahead, and Derek White gets his first goal of the season. McCoy's trying to win that from Joe Miller. It's back with Gough. Stephen chests it down to Hurlock. Yes! The equaliser for Rangers. Gary Hurlock's first goal for his youth club. The Rangers fans elated now. It was played in here by Richard Gough. Look at the part played by Trevor Stephen, chesting that down to Hurlock. The ball was deflected on his way past Pat Bonner. See this from this angle. Great play there by Stephen. Hurlock coming forward, looking for the shooting chance. It was deflected there as Bonner came off his line, and that left him with no chance at all.
Davey, a frustrating game. This 1-1 draw. Rangers the better team. Pat Bonner actually having a very rare good game. Against us, in my memory, he's always something of a disaster. And then Hurlock, for all we've criticised his technique, or at least damned that with faint praise. Thankfully, popped up with something.
Absolutely, and it was a very important. There was some decent football being played by this Rangers team, and the potential was there. We weren't always great starters either, so that was pleasant. And we looked as though we had the roots of something special going on in this period, I felt, Martyn. But again, you look at the side, there's ability there. It's a side that's packed full of ability. And there should be a confidence in the side because, we know what we've achieved the last couple of seasons. I think there was also a lot of expectation weighing on the team at this point. But yeah, it was all systems go at the beginning of the season.
Alan, any memories of that start, that first Old Firm game, the win at Tynecastle?
Tynecastle loved that. I think it was a nice sunny day.
It was, yeah.
And that was where I thought Peter Hustra, it was like, this guy's good, he's quick, he looked quite intelligent. McCoist, just in his classic alley. And I just remember I always loved Tynecastle behind the goal, that big terracing. I think at one point we used to be able to go all the way round down to their end, but obviously, through time they put the fence up. But that one was good. The Celtic one, they get out with a kind of one each.
Yeah, they did.
And it could have been, Martin, it could have been 3 or 4-1. And although we talked about Terry Hurlock, he didn't half finish that one, didn't he? I mean, it was an absolute cracking it was like a half volley, wasn't it, down the bottom corner, Yeah.
Beautifully arrowed in the corner. So Rangers 4 games in the league, 6 points, 2 wins, 2 draws, no big drama at all, sitting in 3rd place. Who's top of the league? Aberdeen, I would have thought. No, Dundee United. Dundee United with 7 points, Aberdeen with 6 alongside us. The Skull Cup, David, providing its usual feast of goals. 5-0 against East Stirlingshire at Ibrox, and then in the quarter-final, Wraith Rovers came to Ibrox. Rangers won 6-2. Terry Butcher scored a remarkable goal from distance, but he also scored an own goal, something he would not do for the last time.
A stunner as well. I mean, just an absolute beauty. Souness wasn't mentally keen on Butcher. You could sense a tension at this point.
He didn't want him to go to the World Cup, but he understood that Terry Butcher is going to that World Cup as his last chance. He will feel, fairly as it turned out, that England had a chance, but he wasn't fit, and he knew. I think Souness, and this maybe plays into the Kuznetsov thing as well, Davey. He knew that Butcher was unlikely to come back absolutely rip-roaring.
Tip-top.
Yeah.
No, and that's legit. You could sense the sort of tension there. We've seen this before, longer periods sometimes between the leader, the strong leader, and his strong lieutenant, that after a while the strong leader has maybe heard off in a certain direction, and he looks round and he's not quite as sure that the guy who's now a little bit more successful and idolised in his own right by the club is blindly following him anymore. And I think there was maybe an element of that. And as I say, 2 titanic egos, that was always liable to happen. Also, I think, and surely I'm not the only one, this is coming throughout these. Souness throughout this period is like a cat in a hut tin roof. There's a I don't know quite what the perfect word to describe it is, but there's a sense of being like a caged animal and wanting to push in every direction. To give you a homely metaphor, he reminds me of my mum, who's never done decorating, right? when she does the kitchen, she moves on to the bathroom. When the bathroom gets done, she wants the living room done. When the living room's done, the master bedroom needs done. When the master bedroom needs done, the hall needs done. And my poor dad, who just wants occasionally to
peace and quiet.
Peace and quiet. And he says it's like a circle. He says it's been a circle for the last 40 years. He goes, as soon as one's done, she moves on to the next. And Souness is like that. Souness is, I think, always striding, always on this journey to somewhere. And, other people might occasionally want to stop and smell the roses, and I don't think he had any time for that.
David, he's thinking I had a boss years and years ago at the post office, and I'm telling you, every day it was like, what's he going to come in with now? He would go and have a cup of coffee, and then everything would all change, and then we'd all kind of realign, and then the next day, it's just got that feeling about it, as you say. Martyn mentioned about the pressure as well, and I don't know whether the pressure itself is making him act even more in that way, but it must have been a bit of a nightmare. It'd be a nightmare in his head. But again, you can imagine being part of the kind of team around him or the squad all the time. You'd be, what's going to happen next, and how will that impact on me?
Yeah. Remember, he is at a war footing with just about
everybody. Yeah. I mean, there's a great, for those of you who watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, I once saw a great promotional poster for it that said "One man's battle with everything." Yeah. And that's Souness in this period.
I reckon he'll be singing "No One Likes Me, I Don't Care." It's to Rangers.
We'll see as it develops. What it does give us, gents, again, I think is a fascinating season.
Yes.
That we as time goes on, we only have so much space in our brains and our memories to give prominence to only a few bits and pieces. The Aberdeen game, which of course we'll come to in a few weeks' time, kind of sums the whole thing up. But there is so much going on in this season that it will be good to get into it with you guys, and of course John and Andy next week. Thank you for your time this week, guys. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, David.
It's always a pleasure. It really is. I love this show. I think it's everything that I'd hoped that it would be, and I know that the listeners are responding to it massively as well, which is very much appreciated. The work that Martyn does on it, labour of love or not, is absolutely superb, and I think that the great thing about something like this, like some of the big series we've done over the years, this thing will stand. This thing people can go back to, and I hope for any of the new younger listeners that we're conveying not only what happened, but a sense of how it felt as it happened.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I appreciate, listeners, if you're not listening to this week, there might be other things capturing your attention. But David says it will be here forever. Alan, thank you as always. I hope to catch you in sunny Spain on Wednesday.
Oh, do you not have to catch me?
I take it as read. He's already there. You and I are still. We're not there yet.
That's true.
I'm the landing party. I'm here first.
Scouting party.
Okay. Yeah.
Advance party. Yeah, that's true.
Let's shove old Alan over there and just see what happens. Yeah, I know what you're like. No, from me as well. No, thanks, Martyn. Really enjoyed it. Obviously, going through it at the time was smashing, but this is even better. Actually, taking time now to go back and get all of the various inputs and just kind of revisit it. And again, as David said, I think, Martyn, you're the first guy that actually look forward to getting homework from. So because of the amount of work that you're putting into this one, and obviously you're giving it to us, and then we're going through. So, but again, it's just absolutely fantastic. So thanks again. Really enjoying it. Yeah.
Good. Hope you are as well, listeners. We have a fascinating few shows for 1991. Souness is on his war footing and he is experimenting again, but that final experiment would come at Tannadice on the 22nd of September after a bright start that saw Mo Johnson put Rangers into the lead, but ended in a 2-1 defeat. The match was tied at 1-1 when Alan Main, Dundee United goalkeeper, launched a long kick downfield. Teddy Butcher was caught slightly out of position, running backwards, and with a striker on him, he attempted to header the ball back to Woods, who in any case, even though Gough, now in his left, was covering if he'd let it bounce behind him. It left Woods, who'd come off his line, to try and deal with the threat, helpless as it looped over him and into the net. The ball hadn't touched the ground from one box to the other. The one against Dundee United, Teddy Butcher said, was my last and best own goal. He joked years later. It would be his last of any kind at Rangers. Teddy Butcher would never play for the club again. Until next week, bye for now.